All right. Thank you for listening to the AdvisEdu podcast, or if you're watching here on YouTube, starting to put the podcast episodes on YouTube to kind of bring some video to the viewers. And today I'm with Wes Maas, the Assistant Vice President for Undergraduate Education and Director of Academic Athletic Services. I'll kind of let you explain the title of that. But Wes, thanks for joining the podcast. And can you go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners?
Absolutely, Travis. Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy for me to be here. I've been anticipating this conversation for a while now. Thank you for finding some time to get me on with you. My name is Wesley Maas. I'm currently the Assistant Vice President, as Travis said, at Florida International University. I'm also the Director of the Student Athlete Academic Center here in Miami, Florida. So my role encompasses all services and support provided to our student athletes here in our international community of Florida International University, as well as some special projects with the Senior Vice President for Student and Academic Affairs at FIU.
That's great. And I've always been drawn to your position, how it had the academic side of it too with the institution. One thing that I like to try and focus on the podcast is not just for athletic individuals, but higher education. Talking about how athletic departments and NCAA policies actually could help higher education altogether for all students. So are there any projects or you have anything to say about what you think athletics and whether it's athletic academic support or NCAA policies, do you see any of those helping institutions with their projects, or sounds like maybe that's going on at FIU? Just kind of your opinion on that, someone that's kind of worked in both sides of it.
Yeah, not a problem. So I'll take one step back. When I arrived at FIU 4 years ago, we were going through a little bit of a transition within our department. There were some struggles in terms of eligibility, progress towards degree, just people knowing what their roles were and what they were supposed to be accomplishing. Coming into the university, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we instilled was best practices amongst the Student Athlete Academic Center. The great thing about it was we had an incredible staff, highly motivated, hardworking, and so it was just trying to provide a vision and a format in which for them to operate. Fast forward 4 years, our graduation rates are extremely higher than they were 4 years ago. We've set the record for the highest GPA in the history of the athletic department at a 3.28. Our APR numbers are scaling towards 1,000 in all of our sports. And we're currently in the academic revenue distribution pool that'll roll out next year. And I know we'll probably talk about that in a little bit. But with that success that we've had academically, with some of the processes that we put in place here, with my role at the university, Florida is a very different state. And for those of you that don't live in Florida, don't work in this environment, the Board of Governors has decided that they want to make sure that students graduate in a 6-year window from the time they enter the university until they graduate. Well, recently that number's gone from 6 years down to 4 years. Well, obviously those of us that work in student athletics, this is something that we've been used to for a long time when it comes to APR, GSR, and our academic benchmarks for keeping kids on track for eligibility. So with the success that our centers had with our small population of student athletes, we have about 400 routinely throughout the academic year. What we're trying to do is scale our processes over to the campus side. One of the ventures that we work very closely with is Grades First in EAB. So EAB has been purchased by the university and will roll out this year. And part of that process is creating benchmarks, creating flowcharts. If you're familiar with the app Waze, where obviously it's a driving app and it tells you the best way to get from A to Z, one of the things that we are instituting this year is basically a Waze for our students, to where they come into the university, they have a concept of what they would like to do, what they would like to graduate in, what major, what career they're trying to get to. And then we use EAB to target those benchmarks for the students in order to keep them on track for graduation and put them in the best situation possible for success.
Yeah, anytime you can find something to explain it easy like that, when you say Waze, I think everyone's going to kind of realize what you're talking about. So it's good to see more technology come into play. And I know you all are getting Portfolium, which I think will help the bridge from education to employment. So I'm sure that'll partner well with the initiative there. It's interesting about the academic revenue distribution because there was some criticism about it, saying it shouldn't have to be an incentive. Yet we have academic performance funding is very common in higher education with state governments, and it's already being tied to graduation rates in 4 years, like you talked about. When I was at Indiana State University, we had commitment, the 15 to finish, where you do 15 every semester, and then at the end, in 4 years, you're at 120 and you graduate. And it's very common for us in NCAA realm, because the progress towards degree, in my opinion, is the most accurate way to gauge how far someone is towards graduation. So talking about progress towards degree, and then I'll ask you about the academic revenue distribution. With progress towards degree, now that we're shifting gears towards a timely graduation pattern, do you see the percentages tied to PTD too demanding, or do you think it's still necessary? What's kind of your take on being very stuck on the 40, 60, 80, which just so the viewers and listeners that may not be aware, it's actually a 5-year plan for progress towards degree. So what is your kind of opinion on the percentages part of PTD?
I've been working with these percentages now for a couple of years. Obviously, we all have. I think it gives the students a solid benchmark on what they should be doing and how they should be performing in the classroom. It obviously gives academic support staff leverage to be able to work with our students who aren't as high achieving or aren't as motivated academically as some of our other student athletes. So obviously we have some students who come into the university and they're already geared up. They know what they want to do, how they want to do it. In many cases, they're coming to you with their planned out academic schedule, telling you the ways that they're going to get from here to there. And then we have some other students that need a little bit more nurturing in terms of what they do want to do with their lives. And it becomes more of a planning process, not a planned out process. The benchmarks give us the ability to have educated conversations with student athletes, to give them the why as to why we are looking at these courses and why there's a sequence that's necessary. But it also just gives them the foundation of, if I want to get a degree in this field, here are the benchmarks that I need to meet, not only to continue with my eligibility, but to graduate in a timely fashion, to keep them on track, help them keep pace, and then eventually earn their degree.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely important, and the flexibility of it being 5 years. It's interesting to hear FIU is actually pushing for 4. A lot of these higher education public institutions are going to that. Thinking about initial eligibility, I forgot to mention this too. Have you seen any impact with the new standards that came out a couple years ago now, as far as students in high school having to get more core courses done and using the sliding scale? I just did a podcast episode on initial eligibility and the sliding scale. A lot of schools are actually making testing optional. So I'm wondering how the adjustment to initial eligibility will go. But do you have any input on initial eligibility? Have you seen any changes, or do you think it's something that students just adapt to? It probably hasn't been too long, but I do know that there's been a less than 1% change in ineligible students coming into college. So as FIU or with your N4A membership, have you kind of gotten any pace for that as far as initial eligibility changes?
Well, I do. I think that it's something that we all have to be cognizant of. And I'll start with FIU. It's been something to where, especially here in the Miami area, there's a large number of high schools here in this area that we're trying to communicate with. And I think it goes to the education piece. I'm making sure that the counselors at the high school level understand the changes, that they're prepared to speak to those changes when they're speaking with their students at the high school level, to ensure that those benchmarks are met from the core credit requirement when those classes get locked in and you can't go back and change them as you might have been able to or retake them in the past. So just helping them understand that process from an early age, from a student standpoint. But when those academic counselors at the high school level really get involved in helping those students understand the requirements, I think that you won't see any significant issue coming out of it. It's impacted our program very little. We've had 2 students come in that have to be academic red shirts, but it was one of those things to where with our compliance office being very diligent, they were able to catch these things far in advance. So we could have those conversations with the students, before they arrived on campus, and it never became an issue. At the conference level, or at least the N4A, I know Ashton Henderson at Florida State University, and some of the networks and some of the community service projects that N4A gets involved with this past year at the national convention, getting out into the community, speaking about these issues and policies and procedures, making sure that academic counselors understand the requirements and the rules that are being put forward, so that this isn't something that catches students off guard, that they are educated in this process. And I think it's one of the things that we have to talk more about to make sure that our students understand what they're trying to complete. I think the NCAA is actually making some strides in terms of their communication and getting this information out as well. So I think all that together is going to help the process.
Yeah, my biggest concern is out here in Indianapolis. I live out in the country, and coming from a school where we maybe produced 2 Division I student athletes in the past 10 years, schools like this where maybe they're going to have to get that communication, because students just aren't aware of it if it's not something that regularly happens. So I know a lot of the schools around here are doing outreach. And so it's actually good to build up those relationships with compliance and academics from college. Seems to be going out into the high schools, and I know Indiana State is very heavy into that with their local high schools, and so that's great to hear. Miami, obviously, a lot of colleges there, Division I, that probably helps make everyone aware of it. So I like the initial eligibility standards. I agree with you. I think NCAA is kicking up the communication. I think that'll help. Now, going to the academic revenue distribution, I know you did an episode where you had the NCAA on here to talk about it, and you also had John Schuke to talk about the academic revenue distribution a little bit. So what do you think, as a director of an athletic academic center and someone assistant vice president, what is kind of your thinking on what the money will be spent on? And then do you have any concern with the fact that the money is not necessarily tied to having to go to academics? So what can we do if we're an academic person to try and make it known to our athletic director or our provost or president, hey, we're earning these grades and these academic achievements. Do we get any say in how we're going to spend the money?
So about 2 years ago, when the conversation started, Conference USA actually had a directors meeting out in Dallas. And when the information kind of rolled out, we were all very interested in this process and how this was going to happen. And I think we were all kind of gut punched on that this process is going to run through athletics in terms of they kind of decide where the money goes once it's earned. So it's one of those things to where you got to be cognizant and realize what this is and what the NCAA is trying to do. From my perspective, the NCAA is extremely smart in this concept of what they're trying to put out there, realizing that their image can be an issue, especially with mainstream media, and now they're trying to counter it. It started with the cost of attendance for student athletes instead of paying players outright, and then knowing how much money is actually out there in the system and how much we talk about how much money the NCAA is making. So going from cost of attendance to the academic revenue distribution, showing that if academic units or athletic departments truly are supporting their student athletes academically, that we're putting them in a position to earn their degree in that 5-year window, that they should be rewarded for that. My personal opinion is that it's a department wide system that's being created and functioning. We have a wonderful relationship here with our athletic department, with our AD Pete Garcia, our SWA Julie Berg, and obviously my supervisor, Dr. Behar, our senior vice president. We all work together to provide the best resources possible for our student athletes. And so I'm of the opinion that money should go to the athletic department. There should be conversations on how it is divvied out or provided back into the unit, whether that needs to go to other areas, not just academics. Now, obviously, being an academic person, I would like for a majority of that money to come to our unit so that we can increase our abilities to provide resources for our student athletes, because it's only going to get harder. But just knowing that, right now that pool is $50,000. Within 4 years, it's going to be $500,000. My hunch is initially it's going to be something that not a lot of people pay attention to. When it's 50,000, it might be, here, guys, take this and do something new for your students. But when it gets into that $500,000 range, obviously a lot of athletic departments that need that funding are going to have some tough decisions to make. And I just hope that the academic people are at the table when those decisions are being made.
Yeah, I was making the recommendation they really need to go ahead and project out with their budgets, where their shortcomings are, and then also a proposal of what they would do with the money. So I think I talk a little bit about it in my episode on academic revenue distribution. I play devil's advocate on the good and the bad of it. And the bad, two things is the conferences deciding everyone can get it. Even if your school doesn't get it, if you're part of a conference distribution, then school A and B might have earned the points or one of the three requirements, and then another institution or two may not have earned it, but they might still get the money. And so I could see that once it's starting to get to $500,000, that being problematic. Now, hopefully conferences are aware of that and they won't allow that to happen. But as far as the money going, one of my biggest things was I look at the NCAA, a lot of things they do, I look at it through a higher education lens, and that's kind of the point of AdvisEdu. And when you look at when public institutions get their money, their performance funding, there's really not a lot of things tied to how it is spent. So I do think that it'll probably just go into a general athletic department account, but I really do hope that the right people are at the right table to see what it can do, because you and I both know how much you can do with $500,000. You can add a lot of services, you can add staff, and when you're really earning the points, the APR points, that's probably going to be the easiest one that people shoot for, the 985. You can project that out pretty early if you're going to keep hitting that number. And so I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I think it's great, though. I agree with your reasoning of why the NCAA needed to do it, and I just don't get a lot of the criticism that's out there. I think it's a very good distribution, and the way it's set up, they structured it. They definitely thought a lot about it. Now, APR is kind of the last main thing I want to talk to you about, and then I'll open up for a couple of fun questions. But with the academic progress rate stemming from the academic revenue distribution, what's kind of your take on APR? Do you see it more as a reliable metric, a smoke and mirrors metric, or just something that maybe is misinformed whenever we do the 4-year average instead of just the individual year, and then we see all these publications, whether it's the NCAA or the schools, sending out high APR? I get the opinion sometimes people aren't necessarily aware of what the APR means. So what's kind of your take on the academic progress rate?
I think we might have not talked about it enough. I know it was something that obviously when it rolled out, and every year we touch upon it obviously when the numbers are released, but I think people forget about what it is and how it operates and who's in the cohort and who's not, and the transfers and all these other things count, whereas in GSR and FGR there are different rules that apply. So especially here on our campus, we talk about it a lot because interacting with our student professionals on campus, there's different requirements that they have to meet for their state funding, and trying to explain to them the APR is just a different vehicle. So I think a lot of times we lose sight of what APR is, but I do think that it's like anything else, whether it's GPAs or the clustering of majors or the demographic of your freshman class coming in. If you put them in the summer, maybe you don't have to count their numbers outside of the ones that you put in the fall where you're showing just your premier students. There are going to be people that take advantage of the process and try and figure out the best way to get their numbers up and the most creative things that they can do to raise their APR numbers, especially now with the academic revenue distribution rolling out. But I know that there are services out there, whether it's the NCAA free services where you can reach out to them and get help through the APR process, or the John Shookies of the world who are going to help you go and really data mine that and figure out where you can gain points, or even holistically looking at your program and realizing where your strengths and your weaknesses are to be able to raise those numbers up as you go along. The APR is just a benchmark in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. It's a great point to look to, especially when you're talking about recruiting and showing potential families, especially here at FIU, how we don't cluster and that we have this shotgun spread of students across the spectrum in every major on our campus. But then we can actually show them physical evidence of bringing students in, helping them be successful by providing them with resources, and then getting them a timely graduation in a major that they want to be in.
Yeah, and when I look at APR, I really try to focus on that 1-year score, because looking from a higher education perspective, retention is obviously a huge issue for all of students, student bodies on campuses. And when I break down the APR as a single year rate, if you basically, there's 3 things you can see, because you can see the APR score, you can see the eligibility point score, and the retention rate score. When I look at that, I try to think of that as a great metric. Whenever we add it to a 4-year average, I think it loses a little bit of its value for what we're using it for. because the purpose of APR is supposed to be a more time-specific graduation predictor. But when you do a 4-year average, you already have a graduation rate metric. So I like the single year, and I talk about that in one of my episodes, but I stress the point that what would it look like if higher education, all campuses or student bodies, had some type of metric for retention that we could easily see. So they have their single year APR. If you think about that, if you had that across the entire institution, you could learn a lot about your retention. What demographic of students are you losing a point from? Whether it's the eligibility, which for campus purposes could be progress towards degree for that 4-year plan. Are you on pace in their GPAs? And then the retention would just be easily, are they coming back or not? You could learn a lot, and I think it really benefit the institution. So do you think that higher education campuses have a metric like this already? Because retention seems to be something that everyone's talking about, but there's not like one good way that people are tracking it. And I think a really good way would be a simple one or 2 point system from the APR. So do you know if FIU or any other institutions you're aware of have a standard retention measurement, or could you see that happening? An APR, say it did, do you see value in that?
Well, I can tell you it's happening in the state of Florida because it goes back to the state mandated metrics. So the way that works for anyone outside of our state, we have a performance funding model that's based on metrics. One of them is retention and GPA. So for that first year, we are rated on how our students do in that first year, how many we retain as a university, and how many we retain in academic, good standing, so 2.0 or above. But that's something throughout the state that all public universities are interested in because it is a metric that we're all competing for. So each school, I'm sure, does it differently. We have an entire team that monitors the success of our first year students to ensure that they're being supported, that they have the resources that they need, that they're working with their academic advisors on campus for proper course placement, to where now there is more of a system and structure in place to ensure that once these students arrive on campus, that they have that ways of figuring out what they need to be doing, where their resources are, and building that community and structure around them. So I know we are doing it. I would be hesitant to say that universities across the country are doing it because it's not something that's tied to a metric or tied to a funding model that's being provided to them. And then obviously if you start looking into the private universities, completely different ballgame. Yeah. For us, one of the things, like I said, we are rolling out this year is EAB. And it's a process to where they can actually really proactively track where these students are. They've got running models now in terms of what your GPA is in high school and what that projects to be here at the university level, so that they can closely monitor the students on campus to ensure that if they do falter at some point, that they have the resources available to them and that they're being communicated effectively with, so that we can make sure that we retain those students and keep them moving in the system.
And the kind of the last question about this, about how athletics can kind of be portrayed more accurately to the academics on campuses as far as the metrics that we use. And I think from talking to people outside of athletics that work in higher education, they may not be fully aware what's the purpose, why is the GSR different than the federal graduation rate, what really is APR, what's progress towards degree. Do you think that there's a way for athletic departments to communicate better to the academic side of the campus to let them know, like, hey, these policies are actually very similar to what higher education overall is doing, and just try and make it look more authentic instead of them just thinking that it's smoke and mirrors or a publicity stunt? How can we kind of make them aware, like, look, these are research-driven policies, and that's why we have these standards set? How can we better communicate that to higher education, whether it's administration or faculty or anyone on campus?
I would encourage a couple of things. It's easy for us here. We actually report to the Office of Student Affairs. So we have a direct line to our faculty and to our administration in terms of the projects and the processes we have internal within our unit. Whereas when you're reporting to athletics, it's a little bit more difficult to cross that bridge or bridge that gap, if you might say it that way. One thing that we do here, we report to the Faculty Senate each year, and we'll go in and we'll provide our academic data to them so that they can see where our student athletes are, what majors they are enrolled in, dispel the myths that are out there about student athletes. And we talk so much about this, that student athletes are still characterized as the competitive on the field and lazy in the classroom, which anyone that works with a student athlete knows that's absolutely not true.
Yeah.
And so reporting to the faculty senate, the ones that are actually, in the trenches, the ones working with the students, maybe they've had a bad experience in the past and whatever it might be, but going in and showing them the data, breaking down in layman's terms what the FGR, GSR, APR, what they do, how we monitor them, and how we work on reporting with them. The more we can educate everyone on what these systems are, what we use them for, and how they help our students be successful, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah, I agree. Those conversations need to happen. And I'll just mention to anyone listening or watching, a great resource for that is really to have those individuals walk them through NCAA.org, not .com. If you go to .org, you can actually see all of the research provided. And then they actually have very interactive databases. They have education points, columns that they can show you. So that they're very transparent. But I think I read in a book that was critical of the NCAA. If you go to NCAA.com, you're not going to see anything about academics. And I reached out to the author on Twitter and I said, that's true, but if you go to NCAA.org, it's all there and a lot more transparent than we are in higher education together. So I think if we're going to have those conversations, NCAA.org for those interested, definitely a great resource. And sometimes you ask like a fun question to end it. This one, I'm not sure how fun it is, but it's interesting for my side of things. You asked someone if, I think it was John actually, if they could be the president of the NCAA for a day, what they would change. Keeping it academic based and policy based, if you were the chair of the Committee on Academics, what would be maybe one or two of your top areas to focus on that you would drive that committee to be looking at?
Let me think. If I'm the chair of that committee, I think that you've got to bring together a lot of the members of N4A and NACADA, people that are dealing with this in real time and getting more feedback, not presidential feedback, not athletic director feedback, but people that are running these incredible departments, dynamic departments all across the country, to be able to talk more to the student athlete experience. I think the more that we can focus on the students and their experiences within our universities, the better off we can be. If I could do anything, it's to make sure that people understand the day-to-day lives that these students are living, the stresses, the pressure, the positives, the benefits of being a student athlete, but really coming to a better understanding of what these kids go through on a day in and day out basis, and then trying to maybe form our policies more to fit that student athlete, that positive student athlete experience. The one thing I'm really excited about that's coming down the line, obviously with the time commitment responsibilities now and everything that the NCAA is trying to do in their forward-facing approach, is giving students, the student athletes, the ability to be students, whether that's travel abroad and study abroad, to do internships and externships, to prepare themselves for life after college. We try to do so much to help them while they're at our university, but we have to be realizing that our goal is to provide them an experience that when they graduate, they can go out and be productive members of our community. So the more that we can focus on their experience internally and program ourselves with time for these kids to actually just be students, the better off I think we would be.
I'd support that chair's task that you have there. So I follow the Committee on Academics closely, and one thing that I do notice is similar to what you mentioned. There's not a lot of on the ground in the trenches academic people that are in it. Not necessarily that they don't understand it, but I think anytime you can reach out to N4A members in NACADA, that's going to be the biggest impact. And that was kind of the reason why I did what you helped me kind of distribute as the voice of the athletic academic advisor. And
Yep.
The NCAA research staff actually emailed me and read it. So hopefully it makes its way to the Committee on Academics, because I'm sure you read through it, but there's a lot of comments from people like ourselves that had a lot to say about the academic policies. So, and then what I'd like to do is end it with letting everyone know that Wes has a podcast, the Live Moss podcast. So if you can kind of just tell everyone how the podcast came to fruition, what you think, how you think it's doing so far, and then are there any future plans to keep it going? Is this going to be a summer only thing, or what's kind of the vision for the Live Moss podcast, and then also where it can be listened to at?
Well, I think the one thing that I've really tried to work on is communication with urgency and providing a service to people. And so going back, one of the things I love to do is provide my cell phone number to anyone when I first get to meet them, because that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. So side note, it's 307-223-6429. Anyway, but as the evolutions have happened, one of the things that I've noticed, I chair a communications matrix committee here at FIU. Obviously, most universities only communicate by email, and one of the things that I wanted to impress upon our administration, our students don't check email. And so if we're going to get in touch with these kids and we're going to tell them about all the great resources they have and all the support they can access and really increase those retention rates and increase the buy-in and the investment, is to actually speak to them. And so it started with a blog. The blog kind of took off and it really showed some progression. And the one thing that I've noticed is this future of voice. I started doing a presentation nationally on communicating with the modern student, whether that was through social media, podcasting, blogging, whatever it might be. And then this voice thing has started to come up over and over and over again. So by voice, I mean things like like Alexa, the Google Assistant, Siri, where I think we've all moved from this spectrum of, when I was younger, it was all by phone, like you called everyone when you wanted to talk with them. Texting wasn't an option. But if you wanted to have a conversation, you had to pick up the phone and call them. Well, obviously, we all know now the last thing that we want is somebody to be calling us. We text everyone or we email. It's a very passive conversation. You only want to initiate it when it's on your terms. You don't want to be accepting phone calls. And so I see this future as we're going to move more and more towards voice. So voice is a very passive thing. And by passive, all I mean is you can be doing other things while you are consuming it. So it's not something to where it's written to where you have to sit there and read it and stop everything else you're doing to read it. It's not something to where, like I said, a phone call where you've got to stop what you're doing to accept the phone call. But things like, Travis, what you're doing with this podcast are things that I'm really interested in, because it's something I can do on my own time, whether I'm driving, working out, working. It's something that where you can really consume a lot of information, educate yourself, learn a lot of different things in a very passive environment. So my goal is to provide as much content and information I can to our membership, whether that's N4A, NACADA, people in our community in higher education and student athlete academic services, people that want to get into our community, or even those people that are on the outside looking in, trying to decide what it is that we actually do. So podcasting became the opportunity for me to try and get as many people as I could to provide their services and their experiences and their knowledge base out to as many people as possible. So obviously, with podcasts being free and the tools being fairly cheap to provide, it was something that I jumped into this summer. The future of it right now, it's doing way better than I thought it would initially, because obviously me being a part of the podcast, I think my hesitation was, can I carry a podcast? Can I get people to engage? Can I get people to take time out of their day to visit with me and get something on file to be able to push out content? And so far, we've had a lot of great guests. We have almost 1,000 listens now, which I know I tell a lot of people right now, I was hopeful to get 100. And the fact that we're bridging on 1,000 in just 14 episodes it's pretty exciting for me. The future of it's going to evolve. And so I'm really excited about this podcast with you, and because of what you're doing with YouTube, and not only doing a audio file, but also that video component. We will branch off into a video vlog, as well, with the Live Moss podcast. Currently, you can find the Live Moss podcast on all of the carriers, whether it be iTunes or Anchor or whatever it is, where you can download the files and listen at your pleasure. But there will be a video component coming to where we're going to start doing interviews like this. And so this is a great learning experience for me to be able to have this conversation with you.
Zoom is very easy to use if you can record Zoom. So anyone looking to do YouTube videos, interviews, I would recommend Zoom. So
it's going to be something that when we get to national conventions, when we get around the regional conventions, to be able to sit down and have conversations, record them, and also do the audio files off of that. The other thing that I'm going to be looking at doing is, obviously right now we're going to get into a slower period for us in the next 2 weeks. Our classes ended last week. Grades actually posted today. A lot of great grades. FIU, great job. Everybody did a phenomenal job here within our program. Our staff has been excellent. But as things ramp back up, starting in August, when, at the end of August, when classes get back, my time will be much more limited to be able to have these opportunities. So I'm going to create a Drive Time with Wes podcast where I'm going to do some social media initiatives to ask questions of our membership. I'll do some email initiatives for those that are just primary email driven to try and get questions from our membership on things that we might be able to answer, or people I might be able to reach out to. Because the one thing everyone in Miami has is time and traffic.
Yep.
We will spend 45 minutes to an hour, depending on where you live, easily driving around and commuting across this wonderful city. So I'm going to have the time in the car to be able to answer questions, to record audio, to be able to create content, and then obviously post to the podcast. But that's the future of it. It's something I'm really excited about, and I'm just really thankful for everyone that takes a couple of minutes here or there to listen to it.
Yeah, I like the amount of episodes you've been pushing out is great. And we have very different styles of podcasting. Mine is really a message of policy. Yours is really informing everyone about what we do day to day in this industry. And so I enjoy listening to it because it's something different than all my free time is focused on policy stuff. Yours kind of informs me a lot more of what we're doing in the industry, because I have that Division II mostly background other than my time at Indiana State. Very limited staff at Division II. So it's always entertaining to hear about the Division I, and then having guests such as the NCAA individuals or consultants. I think that is a great way to get the message out. So final thing, do you have any – I know we're both Gary Vaynerchuk fans.
Big fan, yes.
But do you have any podcasts that you like to subscribe to, or any recommendations for the listeners of things that you might find helpful for them?
I am a huge fan of Gary Vaynerchuk, and I listen to his podcast routinely. I found myself going back and listening to his earlier stuff now a lot more than I thought I would, just because of some of the messaging he has is something that I find extremely important. Right now, An Uncommon Brain, a lot of the higher education stuff. I get into the motivational stuff, especially when things get to this time of year where everyone gets a little burned out and you need that a little bit of a push to get back into it. So I'll actually just go on to iTunes and search motivational or leadership. And I give as many people as I can a try to try and, find the next thing that's going to get me energized or excited about the day-to-day roles that we all compete with. And, the one thing that I'm finding right now, I want to get more into audiobooks. So I'm exploring some apps there to just actually be able to listen to some content and books on the commute back and forth. But right now, if there's a go-to for me, if there's something I'm going to download and listen to, it's going to be Gary.
It's great. And explicit content warning for anyone who does cuss a lot, Gary V, but his message is authentic.
Yes.
And it's clear, and he does really short snippet videos, and he does long form videos. So I think it's great. And then I always recommend Lewis Howes. I mentioned to Mark Trumbo when I had him on the podcast. Lewis Howes is great. He's getting ready to start a Facebook talk show as well. He's very similar to the motivational things that we would be looking for. And then Audible audiobooks is my jam. My brother-in-law, the last 2 Christmas gifts he's got me has been a year-long membership subscription to Audible. So I can consume a lot of podcasts. I have a 45-minute commute to work, so I agree with you. Mine's not necessarily always in traffic like you might be on the 95 or whatever you take to work. But if anyone's into audiobooks, Audible app, I know when you go to sign up, you get a free book, your first account for free. So I think you're spot on with the voices, the trend, and you can do it. You can listen to an audiobook while you're at work, in the car, mowing the lawn. What I do, listen to a podcast episode. Ed Surge is the one I'm on right now for higher education people. But I just want to thank you again, Wes, for sitting down with me. I know we were trying to get together at the National Convention, and the timing just didn't work out with the sessions. But thanks for taking the time out of your day, and I appreciate it.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. It really means a lot to me that you would take the time because I know how busy your schedule is to fit me in. So thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.
All right, Wes. Well, I'm an IU alum, so I know your football week 1. I can't root for FIU, but best of luck with all your sports teams this fall, and off to a great school year at the end of August. Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Talk to you later, Wes.
Okay.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening to the AdvisEdu podcast. As always, go to advisedu.com. and learn more about what AdvisEdu think tank's doing, you can catch the episode notes. Every episode of the AdvisEdu podcast is on the website. You can also rate and review on iTunes podcasts and listen on SoundCloud as well. So thank you and have a great day.